Hello, everyone, and welcome to our B2B Marketing webinar in association with the Think Tank. My name is Kavita Singh. I'm Head of Growth Solutions Content at B2B Marketing, and today we are going to be discussing everything you need to know about your go-to-market strategy, including what it is, how to achieve it, and who it lies with. Before we get started, it's worth noting we have a live Q&A at the end of today's session, so do get in your questions throughout and we'll be sure to address them at the end. And don't be shy, if you have a question, someone else definitely does as well. So without further ado, I think it's time to introduce our panel. We're joined by Liam Bateman, the founder of the Think Tank, as well as Sarah Roberts, the global CMO at Bolden Networks. And finally, last but not least, Sarah Sutton, the CMO at Send Technology. Welcome all, how are we doing today?
Good, thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, great to have you guys. Before we jump into the questions, I think it'd be great if we just did some quick intros. Maybe just tell me a little bit about yourself and your role. And Liam, why don't we start with you for that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Liam Bateman. I'm Managing Director and founder at the Think Tank. We're a B2B marketing agency, and I do a lot of the strategy work and these elements around these sort of go-to-market and things like that. So that's why I'm on this webinar today.
Perfect. Sarah Roberts?
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Roberts. We're keeping it simple, Sarah and Sarah today. So I'm Global CMO at Bolden Networks. We're a telco infrastructure business. For a lot of you, that may not mean much. If you've been on some form of transport today, maybe you've been on the tube, maybe you've been on the New York subway, we're the people that provide you that connectivity. We do that globally through transport, through venues, through enterprise. And I've got a global marketing team through the US, through the UK, Europe, and Asia.
Perfect. And Sarah Sutton?
Hi, so Sarah Sutton. I'm CMO at Send. We're an insurtech software company. We're based in London. I'm going to give a perspective today of the other end of the scale of Sarah, which is I'm in a scale-up business. When I joined, it was startup, very different to the enterprise experiences I've had before. So I know what it's like with go-to-market in a larger organization, and also what it's like in a small organization. So hopefully we can balance that perspective today.
Amazing. And normally we wouldn't be addressing people by their surnames or last names, but I think for the purposes of the webinar, I'll probably be calling you Sarah Sutton and Sarah Roberts. Liam, hopefully you don't feel left out.
Yeah.
It's better than Sarah 1 and Sarah 2, so I'm all right.
Oh yeah, we're not
she gets to be one. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, I think it'd be great if we could just jump right into the questions. It's really interesting to have all of your perspectives as well. I guess the first question we have is sort of a simple one. How would you define a go-to-market strategy? Just because I think people might have different definitions of it. And I think it'd be really great to kind of iron that out. And Sarah Roberts, why don't we start with you for that?
Sure. Well, and I yes, in theory, it's a simple one, but I would argue it's probably maybe one of the most contentious points we may have a discussion about today. So obviously, fundamentally, a go-to-market is how you introduce a product or a service to the market. And a lot of people that maybe haven't very close to go-to-market that's what they think it is. For me personally, I'm a huge believer it's much, much more than that, and it all centers around customer. And the reality is it's about how you can create a seamless and compelling customer journey right from kind of that awareness to purchase and, beyond that. And it's how you create that experience, that customer experience. So it means that they have, fantastic first touch point, post-purchase support right through to, how you then reinforce value proposition and build long-term customer loyalty. So yeah, for me, go-to-market is all about the customer at the heart of what you're doing. And if you start with that kind of mindset from the beginning of whatever you're doing with a go-to-market strategy, then I think you're in a good place. So that's kind of my take on it.
Amazing. And Liam, I see you nodding. Do you sort of agree with saying?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's also that thing, you can think of it as a bit of a roadmap as well. Where we try to come from is when we're looking at this is making sure that it's encompassing a business strategy of an organization rather than just marketing strategy. I think it's about integrating all elements of the business, the marketing, the sales, the product, customer success functions, to really get to the objectives set out in an overall business strategy rather than just a marketing strategy. It's commonly misused term that's become quite narrow in its meaning, and it emphasizes what is a real struggle in a lot of organizations, which is about siloed culture, and that can really damage taking brands, products, businesses to market. We've been carrying out some research both in the UK and the US, which we published in a report that's with B2B in the coming weeks. But we found that less than 50% of marketers in the UK and US actually understood the broader meaning of a go-to-market strategy. And in reality, it's a really fundamental concept in delivering success. And it's essential for marketers to understand and implement within their plans and make sure they don't get stuck in that siloed area within their business.
I mean, that's a really interesting stat you mentioned, Liam, around how many marketers simply don't understand the meaning. And I think just getting on the same page around its definition it just makes it more important, doesn't it? Sarah, Sutton, do you want to kind of finish off? And
Sure. I don't think just marketers. I think of anyone who's in that revenue function. So anyone who's contributing to growth needs to be part of that cross-functional team. And that's the team that looks at anything from product, how do you get your compelling product that hits the right market need with the right audience out the door? How do you generate that revenue? So everyone who's involved in that conversation and effort needs to be part of that go-to-market. And I think the view is go-to-market sits, quite narrowly within marketing. I think we can have a discussion about who owns go-to-market, but I still think it needs to be cross-functional, and that's when you get to the really good stuff.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with all three of you. I guess that leads me to my next question. Now that we've kind of established what the definition is, what key components make it effective in today's B2B landscape, and how can it sort of be linked to commercial success? I know that we've kind of teased that out a little bit, but Liam, why don't we start with you for that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, coming back to those silos, as I mentioned, it's about trying to remove those silos within an organization and get everybody working together. I think marketing can play a really pivotal role in bringing those different aspects of the business together. At the end of the day, we're communicators, so that really helps in being able to do that. And I think when you start to think about what go-to-market is and you look at it from a commercial aspect, you need to then have this change in the marketing mindset, which is about becoming commercial marketers. It's about a wider understanding of the business objectives, where that company is going, and feeding that into everything that you do as a marketer rather than just sitting and doing campaigns. It really isn't about that. And if you can do that from a strategic perspective, then that's going to really help drive through across the business, across teams, the activity you're going. I think there's kind of 6 key components in that successful GTM strategy. You've got to start off with very structured planning because, as I said, we're across teams. You need to make sure that everyone's engaged. Sophisticated audience segmentation. We need to make sure that audiences are looked at in the right way and make sure your targeting is correct. There needs to be a very strong integrated measurement framework because you're not just talking about marketing stats. You're talking about stats across the business, whether that's customer success, whether it's product set, whether it's sales. You need to think about how you're going to measure for each part of the business. Alongside that, a balanced channel strategy, because you're not just talking about marketing channels, you're talking about other channels within the business and other touch points your customers may have once you go to market. And very much as we've talked about is sales and marketing alignment. And what can help that is strategic technology integration, bringing that into the mix as well. So combining all of that can be quite a challenge, but if you get that commercial mindset, thinking about the wider picture, thinking about the business objectives and revisiting those continually as you build out your go-to-market strategy, you're going to deliver a really good strategy and break down those silos. And our research, again, coming back to that, just only 1 in 7 brands reported sort of high levels of alignment between their sales and marketing functions. And that became worse the larger the size of company that you were. So my view is that marketing can be absolutely pivotal in an organization to run this and make sure that this is a success.
100%, yeah. Sarah, Sutton, do you agree with everything Liam's saying? Are you sort of on the same page?
I do. I like the way you've set that out, Liam. That's really clear in terms of those 6 components. The key thing for me, I think, as well, is that it's this aligned commercial play. So we've talked about that a little bit around removing the silos. I have found that easier in a smaller organization than I did when I worked in an enterprise company. It just gets harder when there's more teams and they're more disparate and more spread out. But what we've tried to do at Send is we've tried to create this one revenue team mentality. So we've each got our own function, we've got our own KPIs, we've got the things that are important to the work we're doing, but the goal of what we're doing as a team remains the same, and that is all about pipeline growth and revenue growth. And sales will look at that through their lens, customer success through theirs, and marketing through ours. But it's very much about aligning on that. And I don't want to say that lightly, because I totally understand. I mean, your point, 1 in 7 is a really harsh stat, and there's another webinar right there, Kavita, on a topic of how we fix that. But I totally agree with when you get that alignment right at the beginning and all the way through. And I think, Liam, you hinted at the fact that it's dynamic and it's live, and it's not a one and done. It's something you continue with. We see a lot of success when we've been able to do that.
100%, yeah. And Sarah Roberts, do you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I think I completely agree, and I think the point I just make is that I don't know, we're saying this like it's easy, and I don't it's very easy for us to talk on a panel, and we're going to talk a little bit more about pitfalls and things like that. But the reality is, we know that you can't have the silos, and we know that the kind of integration is really key. But I just want to say to everyone, that doesn't mean that it's easy. And I'm sure that, Sarah, especially in all her lenses, is, found it incredibly hard. So I guess we're talking in always best case scenarios is all I just want to say. Because especially as the company size gets bigger, that kind of bringing everyone together piece is very tough.
Yeah, definitely. I'm sure. I think it's easier said than done, especially in this case. Also, just to tease out a little bit, because I know we've mentioned a few stats, but we actually do have a report off the back of this webinar that will be released in June. So definitely stay tuned for that as well. Now that we've kind of talked a little bit about the definition and how to sort of apply it, obviously bearing in mind it's easier said than done. Just in your experience, because we've been talking a little bit about some of the teams, should the go-to-market strategy sort of be primarily driven by marketing, product, sales, or is it sort of a combination? And Sarah Roberts, I'd love to start with you for that one, if that's okay.
Yeah, so obviously alluded to the importance of not having silos, and I think everyone can probably guess what I'm going to say, that it has to be a huge collaborative effort, and I think the reality is it always has to be in part driven by one team. If someone's not driving it forward and people aren't working together, then you're never going to manage to get any form of success. I think the key thing is to ensure that even if one team is driving it, everybody that needs to be part of it, so marketing and product and sales, are all on the bus together and all have weight in the decisions, all clearly understand roles, and are kind of really trying to drive to the same success. I would say that, for me personally, I've seen probably best success when it's driven by marketing, and not because I am marketing, partly, but also because I think marketing has so many touch points across the whole business. It's generally just as much as it is kind of thinking about, the job that marketing has to do, demand and awareness and how you kind of develop the kind of the end-to-end, campaign. But it's also the fact that marketers can generally drive really good collaboration. Well, I generally find that's how I kind of arm my teams. And I always like to think that we've kind of got our tentacles in lots of pots, so that it kind of can be a little bit easier. But that is only successful if you bring together, everybody at the start to clearly understand what you're trying to achieve, what those business outcomes are. As Liam was talking about, it's really important that you're aligning it with business strategy right from the outset, and you all understand roles. And that you're working collaboratively. So I think it's a bit of someone's leading, but leading in effect to bring people together. Then everyone else has to be part of it and thinking about their particular elements, because otherwise you won't have the success. And again, as we're talking to, this is where understanding and having the commercial skills as a marketer, so you're not just seen as the campaign element, you're actually driving this for business success, is really, really key as well.
Yeah, 100%. Sarah Sutton, did you have any thoughts around that? I'm assuming you agree. I could see you slowly nodding as well.
I agree on the marketing opportunity to lead, and I think it goes back to what Liam said earlier about becoming commercially minded marketers. So I find marketers that are thinking beyond awareness. They're thinking about revenue. They're using the language of the business. So they're using the art of marketing and the science of marketing, but they are getting comfortable with revenue conversations. That gives them a seat at the strategic table, and that allows them to lead these conversations. That's when I've seen it work really well. And then touching on what Sarah said about the natural positioning of marketing, how it touches so many functions and the collaborative skills it can bring, I think it can lead this function, and it can then bring together the right sort of functions underneath it. And I've seen that work really well if you've got the right person leading that function.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's why we're kind of hopefully not beating a dead horse, but sort of becoming a commercial marketer is becoming increasingly important in today's market. And Liam, I imagine you probably agree with both Sarah's sentiments here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just a quick point on that. I think the thinking about marketing and revenue is absolutely essential. I kind of go all the way back to the other end, which is the core business objectives as well, the direction of the business, so just making sure all of those are aligned. But I also think that marketing teams quite often can be looked at within a business as being not they're not the teams that are generating or doing this, doing that, and it can often be a challenge for marketing. So I think this is a way of really demonstrating added value within an organization for the marketing team and raising their profile within the business, because that generation of communication, driving these types of projects, driving this value within the business, just demonstrates how much the marketing team should be valued within an organization.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with it. There's always that notion that marketing struggles to connect their activity to business goals, and it's just a great opportunity to set them up for success and sort of prove their value to the board as well. Moving along, how can you ensure that all departments are synced up and aligned in a strategy? We've talked a little bit about sales and marketing alignment, but obviously there's a bunch of different teams involved here. And Sarah Sutton, why don't we start with you for that?
So I think you've got to start with that shared go-to-market charter. You've got to think about what are the goals, what are you collectively trying to achieve as a team? So what does that mean for the business? What does that mean in terms of pipeline? What does it mean in terms of revenue? Be really clear on what that end target is and what those milestones are. And then you break it down into what are the team responsibilities, what are the individual KPIs for those functions, what are the codependencies. And then you've got to review, and that review this is a dynamic process. This is something that you check in regularly. You might have a weekly, monthly dashboard. You might have a quarterly revenue meeting, but it's fluid, and I think it's keeping in lockstep is hard, and it requires rhythm, but it also requires structure. And you've got to be really disciplined and focused to do that. It doesn't have to be complicated. It can be, these are our goals. They are short. There's 5 of them, and we're just only going to concentrate on these 5. And everyone's always working to those. But it's it's definitely where you've got that common agreement that is what you're collectively working towards. That's the anchor for then everything that follows.
Yeah, definitely. I think that end goal is really important to establish in the beginning, even though it seems like something that you're working towards. I think it's really good to get that sort of established early on, as soon as possible, essentially. Sarah Roberts, did you have any thoughts around that as well?
So I feel like it's very repetitive. Yeah, I agree with everything that Sarah says. But one thing I will add is that when you're working out, the charter as Sarah called it, or how you're going to work together in the beginning, I think you've got to be really clear on who are the decision makers and at what points do decision makers need to be brought in, and then what is the playbook or escalation if something changes. Because I think so often, you start out in the beginning and you have a grand plan and it's all mapped out, and then suddenly there's a delay or there's a pivot based on some of the data that's come in, and it's how you deal with those situations that will make or break how synced up you are. I always find at those pointy kind of moments, that's when the wheels can come off. And at the beginning, you all had the best intentions and you're all working together, and you hadn't thought about how you're going to deal with some of those curly situations that come up. So I think it's thinking about those at the outset as well, and having kind of key roles mapped out so that someone doesn't get upset because they weren't involved in, a decision that they didn't need to be involved in, but they felt they should need to be involved in. And then they go off and do something separate that they don't inform someone else with. I'm sure I'm living the land and saying the stories that all of you have gone through. So I think it's really clear to be synced up. You think about how you deal with those moments that can potentially disrail you.
100%. Yeah, I think, some of those situations you're talking about as well. I'm sure so many people have gone through very similar things, and obviously emotion gets involved at that sort of point as well. Liam, did you have anything you wanted to add before we move on?
Just two things. One is I think, as marketers, we talk in a particular language, and sometimes that doesn't translate into other teams. I think it's really important that if you're running this, if you're the pivot on this, you need to be talking in the languages of the other teams, so that when you do your playbook, when you have those setting those objectives and KPIs, etc., that what you're doing is you're thinking about how those other teams operate and how they communicate and how they talk about what they do, because that will build engagement if they think that you understand them by communicating in a way that is in their language. So I think that's something that's really important to helping to make sure that you can align different teams. The other thing is about senior executive support. It's about really making sure that you get that C-suite senior exec support on these initiatives, because that, again, the research that we've done, it says that if you've got that support, that's where you get a successful GTM strategy. And in fact, the US is a lot better at doing that than the UK is. So marketing teams in the US are better at getting that senior support for the activities they're doing and the GTMs they're doing than we are in the UK. And I think that may be a dynamic of US business compared to UK business.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I wouldn't have thought that, but I guess I've never compared the sort of the UK versus the US market in that way. That's quite interesting to find out. Liam, I guess it'd be great also to kind of transition into maybe some of the more technical stuff. What methodologies do you recommend for sort of identifying and also understanding the ideal target customers, specifically for a go-to-market strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, segmentation is really important, of course, with any of these strategies, because you need to know your audience and what makes them tick. But it can be a big challenge for organizations, especially those with smaller budgets. Sometimes you just don't have the budget there to go out and make those to be absolutely detailed in your audiences. But it is important in knowing how you're going to interact with them. So data-driven segmentation is optimum, but you don't have that information. If you can't get that information, then speaking to your existing customers, finding out who they are and finding out what make them tick and why they work with you. Desk research, reviewing the media can often give that information and build out that segmentation for you. When you're looking at this, start by developing your buyer personas, of course. but don't forget to look at the much wider buying committee, because it's so important in business today that you're not just selling to one person or one type of person. You're selling to a much wider audience within a business, all those that influence those decisions, and then map those against your buyer journey. So considering your initial touch points right through to your sort of customer retention, as you look at the whole GTM. And there's 4 topics here to consider really on that buyer journey. So when you're looking at the different stages of each of that in the buyer journey, think about the buyer mindset as a first stage. So think about what are they looking to do? What's the thing that's bringing it to their mind? What are they looking to achieve? What's their mindset around what they're trying to do? The next thing is look at the key touch points. So where are they interacting with things? What's the media where's the social media they're in? Are they going to events? What is it? How are they engaging and consuming content? Which then brings on to the content types. So what types of things do they like engaging with? Is it video? Is it hard copy? Is it face to face? Is it in person? So where does that sit with that particular part of the journey? And the final thing, of course, is the core messaging. What's going to make them tick? And over the top of that, you should think about overlaying the emotions that influence each buyer at different stages. So when you think about that traditional buying journey, you've got a discovery at one end and conversion at the other. When you think about a discovery point, you're looking at the emotions which are very much reactionary. It's about catching somebody's eye and getting them to have a reaction to what you're talking to them about, so that they're getting a bit of a connection with what you're doing. And then as you flow down that buyer's journey, you get to the more practical end. So that the decision making when you get to the latter ends is, okay, that's fine, that's all great, you told me that, but actually, where's the proof? How implications to have for my business? How do I implement that? All these different things. So you start with that emotional element and then get to the practical. It's about making sure you map that against that. And one thing, once you've defined that, you can layer your behavioral and intent signals across the journey to just enhance your audience mapping.
Yeah, I mean, really well said. I don't have anything additional to even add to that. Either Sarah, did you have anything you wanted to add to what Liam had to kind of outline?
I would just say one thing that we found helpful. We're a small organization, so don't have the necessarily tech or tools to do a lot of the intent analysis. But what we found is just that win-loss analysis is really helpful. So if you're retro testing that buyer, it's fine if they're a customer and you can talk to them and understand why they bought, but importantly, you want to understand why didn't they buy. So digging into that just to kind of surface a lot of the I guess you want to validate, what you think are the right things and are you on the right track. That can be really helpful.
Yeah, it's a great tip. And Sarah Roberts, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
The only other thing I'd add, and I mean, Leanne touched on it, but I just kind of wanted to say that, from our perspective, from my perspective, I find that, the influencer piece can be just as important as the customer. And I think, it's really super important to delve into, who that customer is and what they are, but understanding that influencer sphere, especially when you're talking about enterprise, and really thinking about the motivations of both customer and influencer, and working out how they fit into your go-to-market is incredibly important.
Mm.
And just one thing to add on to that, I think that this is where we come right the way back to where we started with this discussion, which was about go-to-market strategies not just being about campaigns, taking a product to market. They're a much wider thing that needs the integration of the entire business, because as Sarah said about buy win and loss, in terms of when you've lost or you've won a client, the people that are engaging at that end are either sales or customer service. So you need to have that community then feeding into the mix and feeding back to marketing, so that you can address whatever you're doing from their perspective as well. And if you don't have that alignment across the business, then you're going to miss those insights and how you need to move forward.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly why, at Propolis, we've been doing so much work around becoming the commercial marketer, and, how a go-to-market strategy can lead directly to commercial success. But then there's also all the additional elements of having a connected team and, really proving your value to the board. I think those are all really helpful things. And also, I just appreciate you all giving very tangible actions for our audience. Like, I think with a topic like this, it could be easy to kind of generalize and give a broad sort of take on things. But saying, creating dashboards and roadmaps, I think that's quite helpful in asking good questions as well. I always find that with putting together those types of materials. To kind of transition into a little bit about the data piece, because we talked about it earlier. What role do data and analytics play in shaping and refining a successful go-to-market strategy? And Sarah Roberts, why don't we start with you for that?
Well, fundamentally, data and analytics is totally pivotal to success. Right from the outset, both from ensuring that what you're doing is successful, but also especially as marketers, it's making sure that we have all the information, and that potentially when we get challenged, that we've got ways to back it up. And that's the same with all areas of go to market. And I think, interestingly, a lot of people, they hone in on the market insights at the start. You're always thinking about, opportunities and threats and trends. And I think, Liam, you talked a little bit before about, some of those key things, really important to understand, potential customer and influencer, and you can use data analytics so wonderfully for that. I think the other bit to remember is how, go to market isn't you just put it out in market and go, woo, I'm done now. It's kind of end to end, and how you make sure, and that's why I was talking about, it's about customer. It's about right from dot with that first experience right through the whole journey, and then their continual journey with you in the business, and future products and solutions as well. So I think data can be fantastic for that. When you're thinking about performance tracking, how you're pivoting, changing, grabbing insights, once you've taken something out, and thinking about how you kind of optimize the work that you're doing. And then, longer term, there's so many other ways that you can dig into, the customer. And, great example, Sarah, you were talking about win and loss, and, a lot of businesses have NPS surveys. How can you bring that data through as well? So I think my main point around this is, I think a lot of people understand that you need data and how crucial it is. I think the thing that I wanted to kind of land was that you need data at all points, not just kind of up front, and it's how you can then kind of take it further and really ensure that growth and that revenue that you've committed to right at the front, and show that you are that commercially minded marketer. And I think excitingly at the moment, with AI, so much talk with AI about how it creates efficiency. I agree, but it is fantastic from that perspective, but it's about insights as well. And we can get so much more insights and so much more data, and it can analyze the data. It's faster, so it's efficiency, but it will potentially see things that maybe you wouldn't have seen. So I think, as marketers, it's really important that we kind of embrace it, learn as another tool that we need to learn, but really important that we do understand how AI can help kind of data analytics throughout this kind of whole journey as well. And I mean, it's exciting. I don't have the answers. I feel like I'm really just scratching the surface of AI, but I do think it will mean that we have even more powerful information to help really kind of build and develop, and then continually improve on go-to-market strategy.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you as well. I think that AI piece is super crucial to kind of consider and keep in mind. Sarah Sutton, did you have anything that you wanted to add around sort of that data piece?
Yeah, just as I was listening to Sarah speaking, and it's so true about the amount of data that we've got, more data than we've ever had available, and we've got to grapple with it and make sense of it, and it's surfacing incredible things. But I think, don't forget, there's an art and a science to marketing. So there's an instinct that we've all built up in our years of experience, and the data will tell us so much, and it will be illuminating. and then there's an instinct, and I think we all need to go back and trust. We've all got great instincts around things that we know that work and don't work, and don't forget that as you analyze the data, which is valid and important. Just don't forget the instinct piece as well.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I look back on what you're just saying there, Sarah, and think about 5-10 years ago going to a B2B event and it was all about big data. And now you look back and you go, we were not even thinking of it. That was nothing compared to what we've got now. It really was a different thing. Like, one of the things that I really look to this in terms of data is about it being very cyclical within an organization. This whole go-to-market strategy starts off with business objectives. And as it feeds through the circle of going through product to marketing to sales to customer service, the data points that are coming through from that eventually get to the point of the customer, and the customer then feeds straight back to business objectives again. And it's about that cycle of making sure that there is a continual data feed all the way through that defines the direction of business. Coming back to that commercial element, it's about saying, okay, we're going in this direction. Is it right? Is that the right thing this business is? Do we need an enhancement to a product or service? What is it that we need to do? And that go-to-market should be cyclical. It should feed back in and help business in the direction it needs to go in.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. You're all giving very good answers, by the way. But that actually, I think, interestingly enough, we've been talking about all the things that people should be doing. But maybe we could talk about some common pitfalls that organizations encounter when developing or activating their go-to-market strategies, and also maybe a little bit about how they can be avoided. And, Sarah, to your point, it's obviously very easier said than done. But yeah, for sure. I don't know who'd want to maybe kick off with that one.
I can. It's all good.
Yeah,
So yeah, a lot easier said than done. And actually, I liked other Sarah's comment about the art and science. And I spoke a lot about the data, and I think the data is incredibly important. But I think as much as is trusting your instinct as a marketer, it's actually talking to a customer. So like a lot of businesses will rely too heavily on the data, and we forget that actually you should probably also be prioritizing customer feedback. Data gives you so much information. You'll, whether you like it or not, we then analyze it and it tells us something. But, sometimes, customers don't tell us the information quite as they think that, as they don't tell us information because they, don't want to seem as mean as we expected or different like that. So sometimes you actually just got to go talk to them. So I think, we said a lot about data, but I would say not talking to the customer can be a real pitfall. So try wherever you can to remember there's real people involved in this and prioritize that. And then kind of maybe a little bit against that, but something it's a pitfall to think about is that as marketers, I think it's really important that you go speak to the customer, and the pitfall could be just relying, and I've seen this time and time again, salespeople, well, I deal with the customer all the time. I know them really well. They've said this, their needs are this. This is what I've seen with other customers. And marketers not relying on the data because they're relying on sales. So maybe I've counteracted what I'm saying, but I guess I'm just saying, you need a bit of, exactly as Sarah was saying, you need a bit of the art and a bit of the science. And, remember the human aspect in it. But also remember you can challenge views that you hear along the way. So I think, a couple of kind of key pitfalls I've seen along the way.
Yeah, no, I think that definitely makes sense. I think on both points that you said, there's a little bit of an assumption that you have. I think with sort of the AI sort of technology piece, you might see data and be like, oh, this is a wealth of information and take it for what it is, versus, a conversation can be just as valuable. But again, you also kind of have to have that balance. So yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. Did anyone else have any sort of pitfalls that they wanted to bring up?
Yeah, I think one thing is about everything changes when everything changes, and these strategies have to have agility built into them. We all know what's going on with tariffs and things like that. Markets change, and the insights that we get from that data will help inform us, but also we have to have a wider viewpoint in terms of what's going on out there and be able to react. There needs flexibility. If you don't have that within your strategies, then you're just gonna keep going down the same route and sticking to a plan. You need to have process in place that allows you to pivot, and you need to be able to pivot quickly when things change. So there's a balancing act between having the right insights, the right measurement tools and insights, then to be able to actually make that change when it happens. We looked at that again in the research, and measuring impact is constantly cited as a universal challenge. It is a difficult thing to measure. So trying to think of that from the outset, and how each of those teams within the business need to see that impact, how they can visibly see it externally, and feed that back into the mix so that you're quickly able to adapt when something's not going quite right. So yeah, that agility is absolutely important in this because everything changes.
Yeah. And Sarah, did you have anything you wanted to bring up in terms of pitfalls?
Yeah, something I've stumbled on is just trying to either rush in and not spend enough time up front, so not pausing, but the opposite, which is where sometimes you actually just need to make progress. So don't spend months and months sinking into it, to make it perfect. If you can get progress, not perfection, we use that phrase quite a lot in Send to get stuff moving forward. You just really want to start, and then you can test, and then you can iterate, and then you can learn. So don't if this feels quite daunting to somebody, if they're thinking, I've not done this before, this sounds like the right approach, but it actually, when you're talking about a charter and a roadmap, and that feels quite daunting, that's going to take me 6 months. How am I going to do that? I would say you can pick it off, and it doesn't need to take it. You don't need to sink that amount of time into it, as long as you feel comfortable that you've had the right conversations with the right people. Have we got enough to work with, and then can we move forward? Otherwise, I think you could get held up in it, and it's better starting.
I completely agree with that. We've had projects where you just want to get going. It's got to get going. It's got to get going quickly, and that's absolutely fine. We've had others who want to test and test and test to the point where the time frame for doing that testing has meant that the market has changed, and then it kind of gets to an irrelevancy almost, because the market's changed so much that it doesn't have the right relevance anymore. So yeah, you have to balance the two out against each other, I believe.
Yeah, I think as a perfectionist myself, I would definitely struggle with something like that. But I definitely agree. We have a couple questions left from my end, but if anyone has any questions, definitely drop them in, and we'll save a couple minutes at the end to go through some questions. But Sarah, Sutton, I'd love to touch a little bit upon this, because Leah mentioned sort of around, sort of measuring impact. What KPIs do you consider essential for evaluating the effectiveness of a go-to-market strategy?
So I think ultimately it's about pipeline, and it's about revenue, and each function will have their own KPIs. So they need to be aligned, they all need to roll up. But the things that we're interested in at Send, we look at everything. We look at marketing, engagement, we look at leads, we look at impact on pipeline, we look at deal source, customer acquisition cost, we look at pipeline coverage, we look at cycle length. We've got a really comprehensive dashboard. We've got an excellent RevOps manager who's helped us understand and interpret our data and get us talking in the same way. We look at that as a revenue team regularly, but then we'll only roll up a concentrated amount of that data to the exec team and the board. So I think Liam's point very early on was bringing that C-suite along with you. You need to be really clear what triggers and what data are they really interested in, so that you're not coming with your typical, here's your marketing. We've had all these website visits and all these clicks, and what they really want to talk about is what is the velocity in the pipeline, what's going to close this quarter, and what impact has marketing had. Understand their language and bring the right data at the right point. In your own team, you might want to delve into all those millions of data points that we can now see and understand and obsess over, but just work out what you really need to keep in your team and what you need to elevate.
Yeah, that's a great point that, internally, because I'm sure there's marketing metrics that you sort of get excited about, but maybe aren't relevant to other teams. You can still look at that, but figure out what metrics really matter. Yeah, definitely. Sarah Roberts, did you have any sort of advice that you wanted to do?
No, I mean, more to say, very similar. And the point at the end around the marketing metrics. So marketing metrics, there's been so much talk about being commercially minded, and 100% agree with that. But marketing metrics are still important for marketing teams.
Yeah.
So I'd hate for this shift, and because it's not just this, right? In a lot of places, we're all talking about, value and how we align with business, which is insanely important. But you need marketing metrics so that you can learn from them, adapt, optimize. If you don't understand your marketing metrics and you're just going with the pipeline ones, and your pipeline numbers aren't right, you've got to dig into the layers underneath. So I think it's really important that you're keeping both bits going. And really important when you're doing, test and learns and things like that, so that you can, see what works, what doesn't work before it even turns into kind of the bigger piece as well. So really important you have both bits going. So I agree with that.
Yeah, definitely. Liam, how about you?
No, I agree. The thing around the C-suite and the senior management and knowing what metrics they want is something that we find very, very important, because you can just blind them and they just ignore it. And when we mentioned before about making sure you've got that buy-in to get success with these campaigns and strategies, then knowing what to feed back to them, to actually be it for them to be able to feed back to other C-suite and board, etc., is just really important.
Yeah, definitely. I think the theme for this webinar so far has been sort of having a balance between everything, for sure. I can see we have a couple of minutes left for one last question. Looking ahead, what emerging trends do you foresee influencing go-to-market strategies in the next few years? And is there any way that companies could prepare ahead of time? And Leah, why don't we kick off with you for that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I could start talking about AI, but I'm not going to. We all know that's a big driver, and I think yes, it's going to change a lot of things. But I think there's some other important things to think about. There's a big shift away from lead quantity to revenue impact. So the measurability of that, as GTMs become much more integrated, that becomes more and more important. I think also there's accounts-based everything is becoming a dominant B2B model out there at the moment. Only about 40% of large organizations apply ABM strategies, and that drops to about 25% with smaller organizations. That said, larger organizations, ABM is considered a really important part of GTM strategies, and US companies put a lot higher value on ABM than they do in the UK as well, from the research we did. So but it's account-based everything. It's not just account-based marketing. It's about making sure it's across the piece. I think there's also we mentioned this before about this increased focus on the buying committee rather than individuals. So personalization is really, really important, but not just those buyers. You need to think about the wider community. And also community-driven marketing. That's something that's growing in importance. That's about bringing people together to engage and discuss and build knowledge around particular topics, and doing that within a community. Marketing to that community can be very important. And then really, the last thing you asked about here was how should companies prepare? I come back to that agility and that flexibility and those building relationships. That's the absolute key thing here when you're looking at this. I think it's being agile, building relationships, and having the communications between teams.
Yeah, Sarah Sutton, did you have anything that you wanted to add to what Liam said.
I agree with that. And I also think we typically see B2C trends downstream, coming downstream to B2B. So being alive to what is going on within B2C is always helpful. Not to say you'll adopt it because you'll use your great instincts and you'll work out whether you should or not, but being aware of it, I think, is helpful. We as buyers are changing as individuals, the way that we want to be sold to and the way that we want to consume information, the way that we want to have everything available immediately when we want it available. We've got to be thinking very much in the mind of that individual and what they need from a personal perspective. I know we're selling, B2B in our company. That's typically quite large enterprise sales, but we're still selling to people. So I'd love to see that the emotional storytelling still remains a big part of what we're going to be doing and carrying on. But I mean, I don't think we can underestimate or even know what is coming in the tsunami of AI. We know what's here now. We don't know what's coming in 6 months or a year. It's very hard to even predict. But I think just being alive and ready and curious, I think just being curious to what is this? What could I do with it? How are others using it? Just keeping that very open mindset, I think can help keep you ahead.
And Sarah Roberts?
Well, I'm a humongous believer in curiosity to bridge from one piece to another. And like a couple of things that I wanted to add. So one, we've talked a lot about all the things we need to do, and we've talked about commercially minded marketers, but I think also to survive in the insanely rapid pace that is every industry, and especially marketing, having diversity in teams, arming them with the tools. I mean, you hear about AI and then people talk about the AI that's going to be used, not how you train somebody to use the AI. Like the whole kind of development and human aspect of arming everybody. I mean, AI is an example, right? Because I can't answer the question without saying AI for the future. But it's the training side of it, and curiosity. So for me, the big ones when I'm hiring marketers and when I'm thinking about, where the world's going and I don't know where it's going, I always think about diversity and curiosity, because if you're eager to learn, eager to grow, you will evolve into whatever your roles are. So as a marketer, I'm always thinking about how do I arm my team and set up the business for success. And the other bit for me is the human aspect. I truly believe that telling a story, like I'm a big believer in, I always say B2H. We don't B2B marketing, we do B2H. As a human, there's always this human making a decision at the other end. At the moment, anyway, there's a human there. The computer may analyze some of the information, but there's a person at the other end, and they'll have personal motivations, and it's important that you're marketing, to them. I think alongside that is, the more technology grows and is part of our lives, I think there's still going to be an inherent need for human connection. So I think when you're thinking about your go-to-market, and you're talking about community marketing and things like that, I think ways to bring people together so that people feel connected, belonging and trust is a human need. And I think that regardless of what happens in the world, I think that will be inherent. So remembering that as we're bombarded with technology and AI and everything that's going, that, if you think about your go-to-market, it's how you're using everything to be able to kind of drive in those pieces. So that's what I'd like to add.
Amazing, great. And I can see we don't have any questions quite yet. It's funny because I was jotting down a couple questions, and throughout the session, you all just start answering them. So you kind of check them off. But I guess we can end with a question around, if there was one takeaway that someone had to leave with from today's webinar, what would it be? And I'll pick on you, Liam, so the other two Sarahs can have a minute to think about it.
Thank you. I'm going to come back to commercialism. I'm a massive believer in being commercial in terms of marketing. The think tank's been going for 32 years, and I've always focused on being a commercial agency as well as a marketing agency, so that we always think around the topic, think around the impact on the business, what the strategy is of the business, and what impact that's going to have from a commercial perspective, not just a marketing perspective. And that's where I think the marketers can really win out within organizations, is having that mindset. That's the key thing here, is making sure that you understand your business, understand its objectives, and understand the direction it's going in from senior management, so that you can focus everything you're doing to achieve those objectives.
Yeah, definitely. Sarah Sutton?
So I was also going to say that. So now I'll have to say.
Oh my God, I'm going to get like a real bad deal at the end, aren't I?
I was just thinking of your viewers and the roles that they're in, which will be very different. And I guess for everyone, I want to say, you all have a part to play in the go-to-market. Work out what that is, and if you don't have a defined go-to-market in your business, work out how you can start having those conversations. So go back into your teams, go back and talk to your colleagues and say, where do we think we should start with this? How far along are we? What are we missing? I think just start that conversation going in your team.
Great. Hopefully, Sarah hasn't stolen your answer.
No, sorry. No, I think the one thing I'd love people to take away is that at the heart of go-to-market is the customer. So yes, it's commercial, but it's commercial because you need to make money off a customer. But I think it's really important. When I say customer, that also means influencers and everything else. But I think everything you need to be doing is you need to be thinking end to end of how you right from the first interaction with the customer right through to maintaining it long term, community, everything that we talked on is all underpinned by creating this thread around customer. So I think that's the one thing that customer is the one thing I'd love everyone to take away.
Great. Well, I think that's a great place to leave things. And that's about all the time we have for today. I just wanted to thank you all for your sharing your expertise with us. And to our viewers, we hope you found today's session really helpful. If you'd like to hear more from anyone we spoke with today, feel free to reach out to them on LinkedIn. I'm sure they wouldn't mind. Please stay tuned for our upcoming report on this very topic, where we reveal a ton of additional expertise based on research. And if you like today's session, you'll find loads more insights from the think tank. Also, if you want to listen back to any of today's session, this webinar will be available on demand, so you can watch it again at a time that suits you. Thank you very much, and I will see everyone again soon. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.